Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 895. I started off with d4 and my opponent went knight f6. And after I played c4, he went with e5, the Budapest gambit. You see, it's played now and then. I see it pretty often in Blitz. And I think it's okay for black if he plays it well, but my opponent made some mistakes here. So, well, first of all, we follow the main line for quite a few moves here. And since this game kind of terminates abruptly, I guess I will talk about the other main way of playing here, which is bishop f4. The main line here goes like this: bishop f4, you're holding onto the pawn. Knight c6 attacking it, knight f3 defending it, so two attackers, two defenders. The bishop check is kind of disruptive at this point. And if you want to hold on to the pawn, you have to play knight c3. If you go knight bd2, which is maybe the better move, then queen e7, and you're not getting that pawn back. But it'd be similar to the way that I played, except the bishop is outside the pawn chain, and you do get your pawn back. And normally white goes ahead and takes here. Yeah, it's interesting. White almost always exchanges off one pair of knights. I'm not quite sure why that is, but that's pretty standard. Anyway, let's go back to, bishop f4, knight c6, bishop, knight f3, defending it, bishop b4 check. So if you really want to hold on to that pawn, you play knight c3. And you get this kind of situation where if he plays queen e7 now, you can actually defend the pawn with the queen because your knight is not blocking. So they take, inflict some pawn damage, then attack the pawn. This is the most usual way of playing. It could transpose if they played queen e7 first, and you go queen d5. So you get to keep your extra pawn, but black has good compensation on this line. Your pawns are kind of a mess. You haven't castled, and I think this bishop will get into the game pretty quickly. So this seems to be all right for black. Anyway, those are the ways of playing it. Other ways of playing it besides the way I did. I went with the knight f3 line. It's just kind of the way I learned. You know, if you try too hard to hold onto that pawn, you end up with a ruined pawn structure. So this gives it back without too much trouble. Bishop c5 here is the main move at this point. e3, blocking it. You know, he's threatening to take on f2 there, so you got to respect that. Develop the knight, knight c6. Knight c3 or bishop e2 would probably also transpose. He castles. I play bishop e2 now. And then he takes. And that's pretty common, although he can throw in rook e8 first. And as you see, white always takes back. It's a bit of a mystery, but I tried not taking back, and I got into trouble in those games. Maybe one idea is that you do have this move f4 as an option to kick that knight away if it gets annoying. You've unblocked the f-pawn, or maybe you'll just push the pawns forward in the center, but I like to get castled right away. That's also the main move. And then here rook e8 is the main continuation for black. And then there's also this very interesting move a5. I mentioned this during the game. After a5, this rook can come out to a6 and swing across. Notice that there's no pawns on the 6th rank there, so that is all free for the rook to swing across and join in an attack. And it can be pretty dangerous, so something to respect. So he goes a6. That's probably not a good move, and the chess engine starts to like my position a lot here. Knight d5 is maybe the best way to continue. But a3 is reasonable, not because I'm worried about the piece coming to b4, but because I want to play b4 with tempo, give my bishop a good square on this diagonal, and kick his bishop back. So that's all good for white. I go ahead and kick it now. He drops back. I play bishop b2. He goes queen h4. So he's continuing in this kind of active style. And I thought about this position for a while. He's threatening to take on c4. And I didn't really want to give that pawn up. So I end up playing g3, but that's a bit of a weakening move, not the best move in the position. What's interesting is that I can ignore the threat. Well, I guess this just required a little bit of calculation. I don't actually lose the pawn here. So I can go ahead and play knight d5, which is a move I want to play anyway. It's a good square, and puts pressure on that bishop and the c-pawn. And that's kind of the key. If he takes, you can trade and play rook to c1. And you're hitting the queen. The queen's going to have to move away, and then the knight can take on c7. And so you get the pawn back, and also you leave black with this isolated backwards d-pawn. Well, just isolated, I should say. An isolated d-pawn, which is on d6, and that'll be something you could play against the rest of the game. So that's a good position for white. Anyway, I did not see that idea, but I think that's an interesting one. I go g3. He dropped his queen back to h6. Probably queen to h3 is a little more active. That's probably a better move than what he played. Queen h6. I go knight d5 now. I'm not worried about the pawn anymore. He goes bishop to h3. I move my rook out of the way. At this point, I was worrying a little bit. You know, there is this. There are ideas of a knight hopping in here or getting a queen on that diagonal. He just hasn't quite set up his pieces correctly, and I eventually decided there was no big threat, and I could just move my rook aside. And then after f5, there's actually a tactic here that that white has. So this is kind of interesting. It's not a particularly difficult tactic, although I didn't spot it during the game, and I don't know, it's a little bit hard to see, I guess. It's not difficult. It's only one or two moves deep, but it is maybe not so easy to see. Anyway, interesting exercise for you. See if you can find the best move for white here. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The answer is c5 rather. Hits the bishop. And, well, here's the first point. If you take the pawn, then the knight is just hanging, right? So the pawn is kind of overloaded in a way. It's defending the knight, but it's also kind of holding back these pawns. But you can also drop the bishop back. What's wrong with this? Well, that leaves the c-pawn undefended. And actually, black center is just falling apart. You're about to take here and give him a loose knight over here. And so that's a win for white as well. So pretty clever tactics after f5. The chess engine finds an equally clever way to defend. It goes rook a to d8. You say, why does that help? So you try c5 now. Take, and then the queen could come over, queen e6 with a double attack. So the rook and the queen are attacking here, and the queen is attacking here. So that was the point of rook a to d8. Without that rook there, it wouldn't be a double attack, but now it is. So that's a clever way to defend against the threat, which is the threat that neither of us saw. But anyway, he didn't see it. He played f5, and I didn't see it. I played rook to c1, normal developing moves. And white is fine in this position, but I had better. And now here's where he starts to go crazy. He just keeps attacking on the king side. Let's see. Well, yeah, in the first place, this f5 move is not really contributing to the attack very much. Let's say after rook c1, he goes knight g4, and I just drop my knight back to f4. I mean, he couldn't really... his idea, I suppose, was to push that pawn while his knight and his bishop were lined up this way, so I couldn't take with the e-pawn, but it's just not working. So I come in here with my knight, and then he goes full-on attack mode with knight takes h2. So, of course, it's easy with the chess engine to say, well, that's just totally not working. And it's true, it's not working, but you do have to figure out in the game how to refute it. The chess engine recommends, say, king to h8, queen d5. White's a lot better here, but the game would continue. Anyway, after knight takes h2, it really is game over, but you do have to convince yourself there's no attack here. But really, it's just the queen and the bishop on the light squares. His dark squared bishop is blocked out. His rook will take a couple moves to get in. Actually, yeah, his rook can't easily get in because the g6 square is covered by my knight. And he just doesn't have any great discovered attacks with his bishop. So he just gave up a piece for nothing, basically. Let's see, I went back to g1, and he pushed forward with g5. And here I made a good decision. I decided not to move my knight, but to counterattack his bishop. Just didn't want to give up too much. And This has more value than I realized because it's opening up this light squared diagonal to his king. Let's see, he took here, and I took back. I was first interested in harassing the bishop. The bishop moved with an attack on my rook, and so now I spotted the idea of attacking on the light square. So that's the problem with these pawn pushes, the f5 and g5 pushes. Unless they break through pretty quickly, it leaves the king exposed to these attacks. And in this position, the king has no moves. He's forced to block in some way or another. So rook f7, stop that. Rook f7 is a reasonable move, and then I played bishop c4 to continue to pile up on that rook, and then he brings his rook over to defend. And right here there's a forced mate if you want to look for it. See if you can spot the idea. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The answer is queen to, well, either of these two squares. Just put the queen on this diagonal, and there's no way to stop the mate. It's kind of funny, but, well, this rook is pinned, and there's a mate in the corner. And there's just nothing he can do about it. The chess engine says it's mate in 5, but it plays silly moves like bishop here, which you just take, or queen here, which you just take. Basically gives a few checks, a few meaningless checks, or sacrifices a few pieces, and then it's all over. It's still a forced mate after he gives up all his pieces. So anyway, I did not spot the idea just yet. I mean, it has the appearance, just if you look at it visually, it looks like he's surrounded by pieces and he's okay. I had the idea of moving my queen with tempo and freeing up this bishop to attack the rook there, winning an exchange. But of course, a mate is a much better victory than just an exchange. So anyway, at this point, I started freeing up my knight here. That was under attack, but yeah, I had a mate right there. So let's just continue. I think the mate is available up until the point when I actually play it. So right here we're just trading down some material, and yeah, so for example, that rook e1, I could have played some other move there that made it. Let's see, he went bishop h5 here, and then I went queen to d4, and he played queen g7, and I almost didn't realize that I could just take it. It's still a mate, but yeah, the rook is pinned, so it can't do anything about it, and the queen is defended, so the king can't take. So that is a mate, and a nice finish to the game. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all later. Bye.